Hi everyone, I'm Sudeshna from the Abundant Psyche. If you don't know me already, I am a career strategist who also happens to have a real job in the corporate sector. And I have been doing this series of talks with inspirational people. And today I have with me my very good friend, Brad, who is the zero debt coach. And I have been chatting with Brad for a while, and he's actually extremely inspirational and has opened up my eyes to a lot of people and how they handle money. So I thought this topic might be a good one for anyone who's watching, irrespective of your financial situation. So thank you so much, Brad, for agreeing to do this.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. It's always good to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes. So, Brad, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and your journey into becoming the zero debt coach?
Absolutely. Would love to. Again, my name is Brad Long. I'm with Zero Debt Coach, and my website, zerodebtcoach.com. And basically, I'm what's called a Dave Ramsey certified financial coach. And so, what I do in my platform is I coach people on how to organize their finances, get on a written budget, eliminate their debt, and then move on to more aspirational goals like financial independence. So I came into this space out of learning from a lot of my own financial mistakes and causing my own financial hardships. About a little over a decade ago, I was successfully able to eliminate $43,000 worth of consumer debt by following Dave Ramsey's program, which is basically what I teach now. And I just, so I like to share that at the outset, just in case people have this misconstrued notion that I've maybe always been great with money. I'm good with money now, and I teach people how to be good with money, but that wasn't always the case. So that's how I kind of got my start. I started, paying off my debt. I had left a corporate job to move into the music space, and I didn't have budgeting skills. I had too much debt. I had an inflated lifestyle for what I was trying to do, and I got myself into real trouble within 3 years. So about that time is when I discovered Dave Ramsey, got on his program, and went back into the corporate world. Kept my music as a side hustle, and basically was able to pay off that $43,000 worth of consumer debt in 2.5 years. And then I immediately started coaching people, sitting down with friends, teaching them how to budget and doing all that kind of stuff. So that's how it started.
Oh, wow. So that inflated lifestyle that you talk of and the 43,000 of debt. So what would typically that look like for the average American or for the average person in the UK, Australia, anywhere really?
Yeah. Yeah. I know in the US, the numbers are pretty staggering. It's 78% of the population lives paycheck to paycheck here. And I think the numbers are, like you're saying, pretty analogous in other in other countries as well, where there's, a middle class. So for me, it was very similar to what I encounter with my students in terms of the amount of debt that I took on. I went, like I said before, when I left the corporate space, I didn't really have any budget. I didn't have budgeting skills. I wasn't living on a strict written budget. And I also didn't really, I wasn't prepared financially for it. I didn't have an emergency fund. I didn't have a lot of the things that I now coach students to have in place if they're going to be going through a transition, particularly if they're going to be taking a cut and pay like I was. So it was a lot of stuff like I had a leased car. I had, musical instruments that I needed. And, for a while I was living so hand to mouth that I was living on my home equity line of credit that I had taken out on my condo in downtown Atlanta for just living expenses, for a little while. And so it all sort of came to a head when that ran dry, and then my prospects weren't increasing precipitously. So yeah, so that's a lot of what we see with our students is just, it's an overarching lack of awareness of where their money's going.
Wow. Okay. So, where would you say that your students and people you've been coaching for a while now, where did you find the biggest gains in some ways?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, which were the quick wins that they could solve, and then, they could get to zero debt quite easily?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, when it comes to money, when it comes to personal finance, because it is so personal and because the habits and the thought patterns and the behaviors that got them into that are kind of difficult to train out of them. And so what we do in our coaching process is we begin with why. I start with a 30-minute phone call with all of my students, and I just listen to their story, and I'm listening for the difference between, yeah, I really do want to get out of debt, or no, I have to get out of debt. Like, there has to be a strong, passionate, emotional why for them to really go through the process successfully. And then we have to examine, so there's the why, and then we have to examine their beliefs around money, and what, because as we're behaving our way out of this scenario by, organizing their finances, getting them into a written budget, there are going to be challenges that they're going to run into that cause them to want to quit, or cause them to just, oh, my friends invited me out for lunch and it's not in the budget, but I don't want to deal with the awkwardness, so I'll just throw it on a credit card. So it's really the quick wins are the people that are the most dedicated. They have the biggest, strongest, most passionate why. They're really, really bought into following the plan and following the system, following the steps very, very religiously, and recognizing that they, almost like an addict in some ways, don't have control over a lot of their behaviors. And so they need that external source of accountability, that external source of teaching, skill building, and those kinds of things. And so to your point, the quick wins really depend on how bought in they are, how sick and tired of being sick and tired they are, first of all, but how bought in they are to the process.
Right. And do you also find some particular categories where people tend to overspend rather than over overall?
Yeah, that's an insightful question. The biggest one, when we sit down to do our first budget with a new student, first of all, they typically, probably 90% of the time, overspend by about $1,000 a month. Sometimes it's less than that. Sometimes it's a good bit more than that. The biggest category of overspend and lack of awareness of spending is around food. And that's going to be parsed out into eating out in restaurants, and then obviously groceries as well. But people just, unless they're on a written line by line item budget, they really don't have an awareness, because we'll sit down and say, all right, hey, we're going through these categories. All right, we get to the food category. What is that? And they're like making a wild guess. And so what's interesting is the next month or the next time we sit down to do a budget with them, and they've tracked receipts and they've tracked those expenses, it's usually much more than they thought it was. So that's the number one category.
Right. Okay. This makes me feel guilty because I am one of those people who love to spend on food. But also, I guess in some ways, I'm more conscious about the fact that, well, you know what, I can and want to be spending this money rather than I'm throwing this away as a passing.
Right.
So, is there something to say about the psychology of how people handle their money for that matter?
Absolutely. You know, for me, and I know for most of our students, the psychology of money has a lot to do with, just our innate tendency, depending on the culture that you come from as well. In the West, in American culture, it's very primarily consumer culture. So we're under the influence of what I call the marketing industrial complex, under the financial institutions, friends, family, colleagues, peer pressure. We used to call it keeping up with the Joneses here in the States. I now really think that it's keeping up with the Gateses, because our consumption has become so hyper. We hyper consume. We buy houses that are way too big for us to live in, cars that we can't afford. And the difference is, and maybe with some of your audience that, are high income earners in particular and do live below their means, that's one thing. It's not immoral to have a big house and drive a really nice car and eat really nice food. That's not that's not the argument. The argument is for the people that are overspending by, that $1,000 or $1,500 a month. They're spending more money than they're bringing in, and they don't have an awareness of that because they're not living on a budget. They're not, keeping an eye on what's coming in and what's going out, particularly.
Right. Okay. So, in terms of debt, then, going back to that and the concept of zero debt. So, I guess for people who are listening who have student loans or who have a mortgage, I have a mortgage. So,
Mm-hmm.
would you consider that as bad debt as well, or does that belong to the zero debt category as well, or not really?
So zero debt coach, the whole concept of our platform is really aspirational. So what we're doing is we're taking people that have debt, whether it's credit card debt, student loans, car debt, mortgage, and we're walking them through basically an 8-step system. So I would say personally, because I've seen the destruction that debt has caused me and many, many of my students, I hate debt. I think it's evil. I think it's terrible. I think the sooner you can get it out of your life, the better. Now, that said, there are some types of debts that I would say are more of an emergency than other types of debt. Obviously, credit card debt and car loans and consumer type debt is much more of an emergency than a mortgage, for example, because, with a mortgage, you're essentially, it's so common and it's so difficult to buy a house with cash that's a little bit more acceptable. Now, my wife and I, as well as how we coach our students, is to do what we call the 100% down plan. But not everyone can stomach that. So you have to, our platform is designed to help you figure out, like, first of all, how do you get solvent? How do you get to where you're out of all of your consumer debt, student loans, credit card debt, car loans, and then you move on to the second 4 steps, which are, basically the last of which being, getting rid of your mortgage so that you can really move on into financial independence. So to answer your question, yes, I think that debt is bad. I think debt is horrible. It really steals from you in terms of, you're paying interest instead of earning interest. But, in terms of a mortgage, that's a little bit different thing. But student loans are something that have really, really gotten out of control, and at least in the US. I think we have over $1 trillion. Last I checked, it was probably 6 months ago, was like $1.6 trillion worth of student loan debt. And the problem is that a lot of these students go into debt for educations that aren't really worth that much in the marketplace. If you're going to get a degree in underwater basket weaving and you're going into $100,000 worth of debt, that's a lack of judgment. That's a lack of leadership on people that were supposed to be guiding you and leading you through that. And, you're at such a vulnerable age, typically when you're going through university, that you don't have those critical thinking skills to be like, well, it would be much wiser for me not to take on any debt. So yeah, so we very much put the student loan debt in the same category as we do all the other consumer debt. We want to get you out of it as fast as possible, because then, it's going to free up so many other options in your life, like buying a house, like being able to save and invest, more funds so that you can retire earlier if you want to do that, or pursue passion projects and things of that nature.
Right. So one question on the back of that, student loans typically, I think, come with a much higher interest rate, but mortgages typically come with slightly lower interest rates, but over a 25, 30-year-old period.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had both, for example, which one would you consider paying off earlier?
Absolutely, the student loans. Actually, yeah, the student loans would be part of. There's a process that we use in the debt elimination process. So essentially, the 8 steps are. I'll go outline the first 4. Step 0: if you have debt, particularly consumer debt, stop contributing to retirement. Step 1 is build a budget. Step 2 is to save $1,000 emergency fund. Step 3 is basically to put all of those debts into what we call a debt snowball. That's where you list them out smallest to largest, regardless of interest rate. And then you start paying, you make minimum payments on every debt but the smallest one, and then as you pay those off and you get that momentum, then all those extra dollars or pounds go into the next smallest debt. So the part of that debt snowball would be student loans, not the mortgage. The mortgage doesn't get paid off until later in the process. Now, we do have students that will do that, but as a matter of the normal way that we coach people, the student loans would be part of that first, consumer debt elimination piece. And we're going to try to do that as fast as possible.
Right. Okay. And I noticed that you mentioned about £1,000 of $1,000 of emergency funds. Do you think it's enough?
I don't actually. I'm glad that you brought that up because of this whole, global pandemic and what we've seen, we're actually recommending more. Now, there is, after the debt snowball, there's another emergency fund that's what we call the fully funded emergency fund. So what we're saying when we talk about the baby emergency fund before the debt snowball, that $1,000, I am now actually coaching my students to try to save at least $5,000 to $10,000 because of what we have seen happen in this global pandemic. Once this kind of settles down, I mean, the big thing for us, with a lot of our students is just get them to a place where their finances are organized, they're on a budget, and they start that process of debt elimination. Once they've gotten there and they're in a good, cadence with that, then they can, once they've got just $1,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 as their baby emergency fund, and this global pandemic, goes away and things go back to normal, then they've got a nice chunk of change that they can throw at their debt if they want to. And we can kind of, walk through that. But yeah, I no longer think that it used to be $1,000 as a baby emergency fund while you're doing the debt snowball. I'm recommending 5 to 10 now, at least in this during this time. And then after the debt is eliminated, I'm recommending at least 6 months to a year of living expenses, because like we've seen, I mean, I don't know what the employment rate is in England, but in the US it's approaching 30%. Yeah. And it's probably higher than that. And so we have millions of people that are applying for unemployment insurance. And I mean, it's a big mess. So we're coaching a lot of people through a lot of those kinds of situations. So we've elevated our recommendations for emergency funds now.
Right. Okay. And therefore, just drawing from that, people who are, say, for example, sitting on cash, either just on a bit of cash over and above the emergency funds, or just cash lying in the bank, which could be going to, I guess, first towards the emergency funds and then a bit left. Would you recommend eliminating debt first, or would you recommend, for example, getting into the markets right now? Because I think everyone's saying that the markets are at probably the lowest they'll be in some time, and people can make a buck out of, I guess, putting money in the market. So where would you say that the cash should go?
Yes. So I'm not a financial advisor, so I legally can't give financial advice, and I don't give financial advice. But what I do tell my students is what I do and what, my wife and I do. And I am very much a contrarian in terms of what you'll hear a lot in the mainstream financial media. You'll hear a lot, and I've got a video coming out about this coming Thursday about this phrase, buy the dip, or the market's on sale. And a big part of what we do as financial coaches is we teach financial literacy. We teach our students how to think rather than what to think. The financial media and the media industrial complex in general is really, really good at propagandizing our minds to try to influence us as to what to think. And I think a big part of this deprogramming process that we go through with our students, and what my job is as a financial coach, is to teach them how to think critically about these things. So if you look at the financial markets and you look at, okay, so there was a 30% drop in the overall markets, and then those markets have gone back up, now maybe they're 15 to 20% down. But at the same time, the economies around the globe have been completely destroyed because there's no gross domestic product. People are not working. GDP has crashed by an order of magnitude or two. And so I am of the very strong conviction that the markets are very much being manipulated by the central bank monetary policy right now and what they're doing. Now, that's probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but I think that it's relevant in terms of, if you have, clients of yours and, students of ours that are sitting on, cash, for example, like my wife and I we saw the situation coming because we study the underlying plumbing of the financial system, the monetary policy, what the financial institutions are doing, some of the bank to bank markets and what those things are doing. Whereas if you're just looking at the markets and you're just listening to what these guys on CNBC or BBC are saying about the markets, many of those people have no idea what they're talking about because they're not going and looking at, the analogy that I use with a lot of our students is a lot of these financial advisors and people in the financial industry, if you look at financial assets as a toilet, it's like they're great at telling you where it was made, how it works, what the features of it are, and that's fine. But what about the plumbing behind the wall and in the floor? You don't really understand what's going on, and you don't really know if you're buying the dip or if the market's on sale unless and until you understand what's going on, behind the scenes. And that's a lot more work. Most people don't want to do that, but we equip them to be able to do that if they want to. And certainly we've been 100% out of equity since October of last year because we saw a situation like this coming even before the coronavirus, kind of popped the bubble.
Right. Okay. So if I just take out what you said, I guess what you just said is instead of going into the bandwagon of buy the dip, understand the mechanics behind,
Mm-hmm.
and then probably speak to financial advisors or
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of financial advisors, to be
Mm.
honest with you. Like I've interviewed many of them, even many of them in the Dave Ramsey, camp. And I find them to be very, very much in the process, in the business of selling financial products. Now,
Mm.
some of them do have the heart of a teacher. It's very, very rare in my opinion.
Mm.
But going back to what we were talking about with the markets, one of the things to keep in mind is this short-term thinking that a lot of financial advisors, people in the financial media have, and just these memes that they keep repeating to themselves. But what we have to keep in mind is in 2008, it took the market 350 days to lose almost 60% of its value. So these things, it's my very strong conviction that we're really just at the very beginning of this. And so I think that if you are buying the dip, if you are, getting back into the market, or even if you're selling out of the market, you just have to it would behoove you to go back and look at, some of the index charts from the 2008, 2009, 2010 era to see what that was, how that played out. Because the other thing about the 2008 financial crisis is that was just a financial crisis. This is a global pandemic. It's a global supply chain crisis. It's a global, people losing their jobs left and right. So this is a very different crisis. And so I'm just cautioning my students and your audience to make sure you do your homework, make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into, what you're investing in. I think it's important to invest, but I think particularly with the financial markets right now, because they're so heavily manipulated by the central banks globally, it's really, really, it's a dangerous time right now.
Yeah, my God, yeah. You're completely right. Like we are probably just at the start of it. And I'll tell you what I'm doing. I have some cash lying around, but I'm just expecting the market to go down further and that's when I think I would be putting the money in. If it doesn't go down, it's fine. I typically tend to say that I believe in the long game, so put it
Hmm.
in now, but make sure that I don't have to pull it out in the next 20 years even.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
20 years, it'll most likely go up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I just think that, it's good to have a strategy, and it's good to have an ever expanding understanding of how these assets, how these classes of assets function. And I think we're in uncharted territory, at least how the Federal Reserve is literally printing trillions of dollars over the past couple of months. This is unprecedented, and just from a fundamental standpoint, when you print currency into existence, maybe not immediately, but ultimately you're devaluing the value of that currency that is in existence, because diluting you're diluting the efficacy of it. And
Yeah.
those are just some very basic concepts to be mindful of. And I think a lot of people have a sense of what's going on, but if you're constantly listening to CNBC and BBC and CNN, and these financial people, these talking heads, they're just telling people, oh, this is the dip, this is the market's on sale. And it's like, first of all, I just don't trust those people.
Yeah.
I just think that they're either misinformed or they're liars, or a combination of both of those, which is a pretty extreme view, I understand. But my wife and I have been very successful, with our strategy, with our mindset, and that's what we try to pass on to our students. And we're not trying to get our students to do exactly what we do. We're just trying to get them to think for themselves, which
Yeah.
is a really, really far stretch from where most of them are coming from.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. I almost all financial advisors I have come across haven't really been either very honest or very competent. So anyone who's not both of those about money, I don't know if I would trust them with my money.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
and you really should never trust anyone with your money. I mean, even if you do wind up using a financial advisor, you need to understand the financial instruments that you're getting into and out of, and almost using them as the person that's executing the transactions, if you want to do it that way. But
yeah,
that's a big problem in the middle class in the West, especially, is that we give over our sovereignty of this hard-earned currency that we've earned over the course of our lives, and we just kind of go with the mainstream and turn that over to the experts. And I just fundamentally disagree with that paradigm, because I've seen so many people get burned by it. And I really am kind of raising the flag that, look, you can learn to do this yourself, but it's going to take some time and some effort. But there are people, financial coaches and people in the personal finance space, that specialize in equipping people with the tools that they need to go out, because you're the only one that has your own best interest in mind. No one else does. And so that's really the mindset that we try to instill, in our students as we kind of, send them off into the world.
yeah. Okay, that was really insightful, and I guess that's quite a lot to take in. So I think
Sure.
we'll stop here.
Great.
Thank you so much for enlightening us on all of that wonderful um, insight. And yeah, thank you so much, Brad. I think I'll speak to you later. And thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.